Some truths aren't meant to stay buried, but I wish this one had. That's the line that still echoes in my head whenever I think about my grandparents' old house, the one with the faded blue shutters and the smell of camphor and jasmine that clung to every curtain. It was where I spent most of my childhood summers, barefoot on the cool terrazzo floors, chasing the sound of my grandfather's laughter and my grandmother's humming from the kitchen. I used to think they were the perfect couple, simple, quiet people who had survived harder times and built something beautiful together. My grandfather, or Dada, as I called him, was the sort of man who fixed everything himself: clocks, radios, even broken hearts. My grandmother, Nanny, was softer, more elusive, always smiling, always busy, always keeping things just so. They'd sit together every evening on the veranda, him reading the newspaper, her shelling peas into a silver bowl, and I'd watch them like they were a movie about love that lasted. But that was before I found the box. Before the whispers turned into truths I couldn't unhear. Before I learned that even the most loving homes can hold shadows you never saw until the light hit them just right. I grew up in Karachi, in a cramped apartment above my parents' tailoring shop. Every summer, they'd send me to my grandparents' house in Hyderabad, partly to give me a break from city life, but mostly, I think, because the shop kept them too busy to look after a restless 10-year-old. Those summers were my sanctuary. I'd wake to the smell of parathas frying in ghee, to the sound of the ceiling fan chopping the morning air. Nanny would scold me gently for sleeping in, "The sun's up, and you're wasting the day, beta." While Dada would wink from behind his newspaper, pretending not to hear. Afternoons were for naps, or pretending to nap, and then running barefoot through the guava orchard behind the house. Evenings were slower. I'd sit beside Dada as he told stories about his younger days in the railways, about long journeys and lost friends. There was a photograph that always caught my attention, framed neatly on the living room wall. A sepia portrait of Dada and Nanny, probably taken the year they got married. He was young, mustached, proud. She looked almost shy, her gaze turned slightly away from the camera. But right beside that photo was another, a smaller one, black and white, of a baby I didn't recognize. When I once asked who the baby was, Nanny had simply said, "A distant relative, long gone." And that was it. Her tone left no room for more questions. Years passed, and I grew up, went to university, found a job, and slowly, life crowded out those childhood summers. My visits became shorter, a weekend here, a quick stop there. When Dada fell sick, I was already living in Lahore. I took a night train to Hyderabad when I got the call from my mother. I still remember walking into that house after years away. The smell was the same, that mix of mothballs and rose water, of old books and time itself. But the air was heavier now. Dada was in bed, thinner than I remembered, his breath shallow but steady. Nanny sat beside him, holding his hand like she had been holding it for a lifetime. He looked at me and smiled faintly. "My little Meher," he whispered, "you've grown." I smiled through tears I hadn't realized were falling. "You always say that, Dada." He chuckled weakly. "And every time, it's true." That night, I stayed with them. Nanny made her special lentil soup, and we ate together like old times, except quieter, slower. I could feel something in the air, a kind of unfinished story. Maybe it was the way Nanny kept glancing at the clock, or how she seemed restless, as if waiting for something, or someone. Or maybe it was just the way Dada looked at her when he thought no one was watching, like there was something he needed to say, but couldn't anymore. Dada passed away a week later. Peacefully, they said. The funeral was simple. Relatives I hadn't seen in years came and went. The house filled with condolences, murmured prayers, and the quiet grief that hangs between old relatives who don't know what to say. After everyone left, it was just me, Nanny, and silence. She didn't cry much. Just sat by his empty bed, her fingers tracing the creases on his pillow. "He was a good man," she said softly. "Better than most." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. A few days later, she handed me a small brass key. "For you," she said, her voice low. "In the attic, there's an old trunk. Take what you want. The rest, burn." I frowned. Burn? Why? She didn't answer. Just turned away, her back trembling slightly. That night, I climbed the narrow attic stairs. The air was thick with dust and memories. And there, under an old quilt, was the trunk, heavy, locked, the metal cold under my fingers. When I turned the key, it creaked open with a sigh, like it had been waiting decades to be found. Inside were letters tied with faded ribbon, photographs I'd never seen, and at the very bottom, a small tin box, sealed shut. Something about it made my heart pound. I didn't open it then. Not yet. Because some part of me already knew, whatever truth it held, it would change everything I thought I knew about my grandparents. I didn't sleep that night. The trunk sat in the corner of my old bedroom, the letters stacked neatly beside it, the tin box still unopened. I kept glancing at it as if it might open on its own, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. In the quiet of the house, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock downstairs, a sound that used to comfort me as a child. Now, it felt heavier somehow, like each second was carrying the weight of something unspoken. By morning, I decided I wouldn't look inside. Some things, I told myself, belonged to the dead. Nanny was making breakfast when I came down, her movements slower, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea into chipped porcelain cups. Couldn't sleep? She asked without looking up. I shook my head. She nodded, then said softly, "The house feels too quiet now." There was something in her voice, not grief exactly, but a kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of holding something inside. I wanted to ask her about the trunk, about the letters, but the words stuck somewhere between my throat and my courage. So instead, I asked, "Do you want me to stay a few more days?" She smiled faintly. "You have your work, Beta. I'll manage." Her eyes, though, they didn't match the calmness in her voice. They looked tired, haunted even. Later that day, I began sorting through the letters. They were old, written in a careful, looping hand. Most were addressed to my grandfather, some from friends, some from old colleagues. But one, just one, was different. It was addressed to him, yes, but signed only with the initial S. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. And the words, they didn't sound like friendship. "I miss the mornings when you used to whistle outside my window. The house feels empty without your voice." My heart tightened as I read line after line of affection that didn't belong in the life I thought my grandfather had lived. The letter was dated 1969, long before I was born. Long before my mother, even. And the address at the top wasn't their home. It was a street I didn't recognize. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at that single piece of paper, feeling the air grow thick around me. It couldn't be what I thought it was. Dada had been faithful, the kind of man who waited for Nanny to finish her prayers before starting dinner. He wasn't capable of secrets like this. Was he? I told myself it was probably a misunderstanding, maybe S was a relative, a friend from before their marriage. But deep down, a small, unsteady voice whispered, "You know better." That night, I went back to the attic. The air was cooler, the moonlight slipping through the slats in thin silver lines. I sat cross-legged beside the trunk and pulled out the tin box. It was light, sealed with rusted clips. My fingers hesitated before prying them open. Inside were photographs. Old ones. Some were black and white, others yellowed with time. The first few were familiar, my grandparents at a railway station, my mother as a baby. But beneath those, I found something that made my breath catch. A photo of Dada, younger, smiling, holding a baby I didn't recognize. The same baby from the photograph in the living room. Only this time, there was another woman beside him. Not Nanny. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon. Her face soft, radiant, full of warmth. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words. "Summer, 1967, our little Farah." My hands trembled. Farah. The name meant nothing to me. But the way it was written, "our little Farah," said everything. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The attic seemed to shrink around me. For a long time I sat there, staring at the photo, the name echoing in my mind. Was this another child? Someone my grandparents had never told us about? Or worse, someone he had with her? The next morning, I found Nanny in the garden, trimming her rose bushes with careful, steady hands. She looked peaceful, almost serene, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. "Nanny," I said quietly. She looked up, eyes soft. I found some old photographs. And a letter. Her hands froze for a split second, so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching. "What kind of photographs?" she asked, too evenly. "Of Dada. And someone else. A woman. And a baby." She went still. The shears in her hand slipped slightly, grazing her finger. A tiny bead of blood bloomed at the tip. She didn't seem to notice. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't have gone through that trunk." "I didn't mean to pry." "You gave me the key, Nanny." She sighed then, a long, weary sound, like the air leaving an old wound. "Some things," she said softly, "are meant to stay buried with the people who lived them." I knelt beside her. "Who was she, Nanny? Who's Farah?" Her eyes flickered, pain, hesitation, then something like resignation. She looked away, staring at the roses. "She was a mistake," she said finally. "But she wasn't mine." That was all she said. For days after, she avoided me, moving quietly around the house, keeping busy with chores that didn't need doing. The air between us grew heavy, thick with unspoken things. And I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The woman's face. The baby's eyes. And the way my grandfather had smiled, open, unguarded, happy. Who was she? Who was Farah? And what kind of mistake could haunt a family for 50 years? That night, I called my mother. She sounded tired, distracted. "What is it, Meher?" I hesitated, then said, "Mom, did you ever hear of someone named Farah?" There was silence on the line. Then, a small, shaky breath. "Where did you hear that name?" "In Dada's things. I found some old photos." A pause. Then, very quietly. "You weren't supposed to." Her voice cracked on the last word, and something inside me broke with it. "Mom," I whispered. "Who is she?" But before she could answer, the line went dead. And that's when I knew. Whatever truth my grandparents had hidden, my mother was part of it too. The call ended, but her silence stayed. It sat heavy in the air like humidity before a storm, thick, breathless, waiting. I tried calling again. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. By the 4th, it went straight to voicemail. "Amy, please call me back," I said, my voice shaking. "It's important." When she didn't, I sat in the quiet, surrounded by half-open boxes and letters that suddenly felt radioactive. The tin box lay on the table like a wound, small, closed, but pulsing with truth. I thought about Nanny's words. She was a mistake. But she wasn't mine. That single line looped in my head all night. What kind of mistake lasts 50 years? By morning, I had made up my mind. If no one would tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I started with the photograph, the one labeled Summer, 1967, Our Little Farah. The address on the back of one of the letters matched the same year. A street name, Numish Colony Road. That street still existed. So did the small, crumbling house at its corner. I found it through an old property directory, dusty and yellowed, in the district library. It was listed under the name S. Raymond. S, just like the letters. I sat there for a long moment, staring at that entry, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. Then I copied the address. The house was old, single-story, with peeling paint and a rusted gate half swallowed by ivy. It looked like it had been empty for decades. The afternoon sun turned the metal warm under my palm as I pushed the gate open. A neighbor, an elderly man watering plants, looked up. You looking for someone, Beatty? I'm not sure, I said. Do you know who lived here? He frowned, thinking. Used to be the Raymond family. Long gone now. Moved out years back. Only the daughter visited sometimes. The daughter? He nodded. Farah, I think her name was. Poor soul. Grew up without her mother, I heard. The father died young. My heart stopped for a beat. Do you know where she is now? He squinted, shook his head. Not really. She used to visit the old cemetery, by the railway line. Maybe someone there would know. The cemetery was quiet, overgrown with grass and thyme. The air smelled of rust and marigolds. I walked slowly through the rows until I found it, a modest gravestone under the shade of a neem tree. Sadia Raymond, 1938 to 1971. Just 33. The dates lined up. The letters were from 1969. The photo from 1967. She would have died 2 years later. My hands trembled as I traced the engraved name. Sadia. The S. And beside her grave, a smaller one. Farah Raymond, 1967 to 1995. I stood there for a long time. The sun lowered itself into golden silence. So she was gone too. All the people in that photo, gone. Except Nanny. And suddenly, I understood her eyes, her tiredness, the way she'd said she wasn't mine. Because she'd lived her whole life beside a man who loved someone else. I went back to the house that evening. Nanny was sitting in the living room, a shawl draped around her shoulders even though it was warm. She looked smaller somehow. When I entered, she didn't look up. Just said quietly, "You went digging, didn't you?" I sat down across from her. Who was she, Nanny? Sadia Raymond. And Farah? She was silent for a long time. The clock ticked, the evening call to prayer drifted in through the window, and finally, she exhaled. She was your grandfather's first love, she said softly. Before me. My breath caught. First, love? Nanny nodded. They met before the partition. He worked at the railway. She was a schoolteacher. They planned to marry, but her family didn't approve. She was from a different sect, her father forbade it. Your dada left for Karachi soon after. And then, he met me. Her hands twisted the edge of her shawl. I thought that was the end of it. He told me it was. But it wasn't, I whispered. No, she said. It wasn't. Nanny's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. 2 years after our marriage, I found out she'd moved here to Hyderabad with her husband. They had a daughter, Farah. I remember the day I saw her by chance at the bazaar. She was buying lentils, just like me. She looked the same, except older, sadder. We spoke only once. She asked me how he was. I told her he was well. And then we never saw each other again. But then, the photos? The letters? She took a shaky breath. He went to see her. A few times, I think. I never asked. I was angry, but also. I was afraid. I thought if I forced him to choose, I'd lose. So I said nothing. The tremor in her voice deepened. When she died in that car accident, he was the one who arranged the funeral. He said it was the least he could do. That was when I learned about Farah, her daughter. She was only 4. No one from Sadia's family wanted her. So he brought her home. My heart stopped. Home? You mean? Nanny nodded. Yes, Meher. Farah lived with us. For a year. Until your mother was born. I could barely breathe. Then what happened? She disappeared, Nanny whispered. One morning, she was gone. Your grandfather said her relatives had come for her. But I never saw them. I never saw her again. The room spun slightly, as if the air itself was bending around the truth. I pressed my palms together. So, what you're saying is, Farah was your grandfather's daughter. Nanny looked at me then, eyes tired, full of a sorrow that time hadn't dulled. Yes, she said. Your grandfather had another child. And he never told anyone. Not even your mother. My throat tightened. And my mother? I asked. She knows now, doesn't she? Nanny nodded slowly. She found out years later. When he was sick. That's why she could never forgive him. I sat there, silent, my hands cold despite the warmth of the room. The perfect love I'd admired all my life, the laughter, the quiet companionship, had been built on secrets and loss. And now, even in death, Dad as past was still unraveling the family he left behind. That night, I opened the tin box one last time. Beneath the photographs was a folded letter. My grandfather's handwriting. If anyone ever finds this, know that I did wrong by both women. I loved them both, and in doing so, I ruined them. I couldn't choose. And so I lost. I sat there for a long time, reading those words over and over. Love, it seemed, wasn't always noble. Sometimes it was selfish. And sometimes it destroyed everything in its path, even the people who never asked to be part of it. I didn't know how long I sat there, holding that letter in my trembling hands. The paper was soft, brittle from age, and smudged where his ink had bled. My grandfather's words weren't a confession. They were an apology written too late, to people who could no longer read them. When I finally looked up, dawn had begun to wash the room in gray. I could hear Nanny moving in the kitchen, the clinking of cups and the faint hiss of the kettle. Life, somehow, went on. But something inside me had shifted. All my life, I had built my idea of love around them, around what I thought they were. Steady, enduring, pure. And now that image had cracks running through it, fine but permanent. Still, a part of me couldn't let go of the questions that clung to the edges of this story. If my grandfather had raised Farah, even for a year, where had she gone? And why had no one ever mentioned her again? That evening, I finally got a call from my mother. Her voice was low, weary. Meher, you shouldn't have gone through their things. You knew, I said quietly. You knew all along. There was a pause, long enough for the hum of static to fill it. Then she sighed. I found out when I was 16, she said. I overheard them talking. Nanny was crying. Dada said something about losing Farah twice. I didn't understand then. Later, when I asked, he told me she was a child from a friend's family. That he'd helped care for her after her mother died. I believed him. She took a shaky breath. It wasn't until years later, when I saw one of the photos, that I realized the truth. The way he looked at that little girl. It was in his eyes, Meher. You can't fake that kind of love. My throat ached. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't our secret to tell, she said. And because it hurt. I couldn't bear to think that the man who raised me had another daughter he never claimed. Her voice broke then. Do you understand what that does to a person? To know you were loved by half of someone's heart? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because yes, I understood. Not from experience, but from the echo of her pain. Where did she go? I asked finally. Do you know? No, my mother whispered. He said her relatives took her. But I don't think they did. I think something else happened. That night, I dreamed of Farah. She was standing in the guava orchard, barefoot, her hair loose, her eyes full of something I couldn't name. She looked like a ghost, not in the haunting way, but in the sense that she belonged to a story no one had finished telling. When I woke, the dream clung to me like humidity. So I did something I hadn't planned to, I went looking again. If anyone knew where she had gone, it would be someone from Sadia's side of the family. I remembered the neighbor's words, her family didn't approve. A few hours of searching through old public records led me to a small address in Thada, listed as property inherited by the Raymond family. It was a long shot. But I needed closure. Thada was quiet, almost timeless, narrow streets lined with crumbling houses and the scent of the river in the air. When I found the address, a middle-aged woman answered the door. She wore a faded dupatta and a cautious expression. "Yes," she said. "Hello. I'm sorry to bother you," I began. "My name is Meher. I'm looking for someone, or rather, information about someone." Sadia Rahman. Or her daughter, Farah. Her eyes widened slightly. "Sadia? You knew her?" I hesitated. "Not personally. But my grandfather did." Something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe resentment. "You're one of his people, then," she said quietly. Her tone made me uneasy. "You knew my grandfather?" "I knew what he did," she replied flatly. "He ruined Sadia's life. She waited for him like a fool, even after her father married her off to another man. When he died, she was alone. If he hadn't come back into her life, maybe she'd still be alive." Her words hit like stones, hard, cold, unyielding. "Please," I said, voice shaking, "I just want to understand what happened to Farah." The woman's expression softened a little. "Farah was a good girl. She grew up quiet, shy. After Sadia died, a man came and took her away. Said he was a family friend. We thought he'd give her a better life." My stomach tightened. "A man?" "Yes," she said. "Older. Polite. Always dressed neatly. He said he worked with Sadia's husband once." We believed him. A chill ran through me. "Did he give his name?" She thought for a moment. "I don't remember exactly. Something like Iqbal. Or Imran. Not my grandfather's name. But something about the story didn't sit right." Back in Hyderabad, I found Nanny sitting on the veranda again, the same spot where she and Dada had shared their quiet evenings. The sun was setting, the light soft and gold around her. I sat down beside her. "Nanny," I said gently, "after Sadia died, did you ever meet Farah?" She didn't answer right away. Just stared at the horizon. "Finally," she said, "once. She came to the house when she was older, maybe 25, 26. She said she wanted to meet her father. I told her he was out. The truth was, he was sitting right inside, listening." My breath caught. "Why didn't he go to her?" Nanny's eyes filled with tears. "Because he was ashamed. He thought he had no right. He said seeing her would destroy what little peace he had left." She swallowed hard. She left without saying another word. That was the last time we saw her. I closed my eyes. She died 10 years later, Nanny. Alone. Her hands stilled on her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Then perhaps, she never stopped waiting either. The house was silent after that. I could hear the sound of the street outside, the call of a vendor, the distant laughter of children, all the things that make life go on, even when your heart is somewhere else. And I realized something that both pained and freed me. The truth my grandparents had kept hidden wasn't just about betrayal. It was about regret. The kind that festers when you let fear decide for you. But I wasn't done. There was still one last thing I needed to know. If Farah had come to the house, if my grandfather had seen her that day, there had to be proof. A letter. A note. Something. And so, once again, I climbed those attic stairs. The dust greeted me like an old friend. And as I searched through the trunk's bottom layer, I found it, a sealed envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. To Farah. The date, 1989. The year she had visited. My heart began to race as I unfolded it. My dearest Farah. I don't expect your forgiveness. You came to me today, and I couldn't open the door. I have spent my life running from what I did, and in doing so, I've run from you. You are my greatest sin and my greatest sorrow. If you ever read this, know that I loved you, in silence, in shame, in secret. The letter trembled in my hands. my grandfather had loved her. But fear had turned his love into a ghost that haunted every generation after him. The letter slipped from my hands and floated gently to the attic floor. For a long time I just stared at it, that fragile piece of paper that had somehow survived dust, decades, and denial. There it was, all the words my grandfather had never said aloud. All the love he'd buried under duty and guilt. When I finally went downstairs, Nanny was asleep in her chair, her shawl slipping off one shoulder. I tucked it back around her and sat on the floor beside her, the letter resting on my knees. Outside, the evening call to prayer drifted through the air. The muezzin's voice trembled like an echo from another lifetime. For the first time I felt peace, not because the story was beautiful, but because it was whole. The next morning, I made a decision. If silence could rot a family from the inside, maybe truth, even a painful one, could start to heal it. So I called my mother. When she arrived later that day, she carried herself with that same mix of hesitation and strength I'd always seen in her. I handed her the letter. She didn't say a word, just sat down by the window and began to read. Her hands started trembling halfway through. By the end, she was crying, the quiet kind of crying that comes from years of unspoken grief. He did love her, she whispered. All this time, I thought he just forgot. That he moved on. I nodded. He loved both of you, Mama. Just differently. And badly. She let out a shaky laugh through her tears. You sound like him. Maybe, I said softly. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that means I can fix what he couldn't. We decided to find Farah's grave. It took weeks of digging, through death records, local archives, and handwritten registers that smelled of mildew and memory. When we finally found it, it was in a small cemetery near Jamshoro, overgrown and almost forgotten. The stone was cracked. The name barely visible. Farah Raymond, 1964 to 1999. Below it, a single line, gone too soon, but remembered by one. My mother traced the engraving with her fingers. By one, she murmured. That must have been him. I placed the letter on the grave, the one he had written but never sent. The wind lifted its edge for a moment, like the world itself was exhaling. I think she waited long enough, I said. My mother nodded, her eyes distant. Maybe he did too. After that day, something subtle changed between us. The air felt lighter at home. Nanny started smiling again, small, careful smiles, but real ones. One evening, I found her sitting with the old photo album open, tracing a picture of my grandfather. He made terrible mistakes, she said, not looking up. But he was a good man in the ways he knew how to be. I suppose that's all any of us can claim. I sat beside her. Do you ever wish you hadn't found out? That I'd left it buried? She turned to me, her eyes clear and steady. No. Truth hurts less than ghosts. Months passed. I returned to Karachi, back to my job, my ordinary routines. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the creak of an attic stair in my dreams. I knew it wasn't haunting me, it was reminding me. That silence is never neutral. It either protects or poisons. And in our family, for too long, it had done the latter. One day, I received a letter in the mail, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's. Inside was a photo. A woman standing in front of a small shop, smiling shyly at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Farah, 1989. I stared at it for a long time. There was something familiar in her face, not just the eyes or the jawline, but the quiet resilience in her smile. She looked like us. Like family. That evening, I framed the photo and placed it on the mantel, right beside my grandparents' picture. 3 faces, 3 stories, bound together at last. And when Nanny saw it, she didn't say anything. She just reached out, touched the frame, and whispered, "Welcome home, Beatty." In the weeks that followed, I began writing down the story, not as a confession, but as a preservation. Because someday, someone else in our family might go digging through that attic. And I wanted them to find more than just secrets. I wanted them to find the truth, and the lesson that came with it. That love, even when flawed, leaves behind traces worth saving. That shame, when faced, can turn into grace. And that sometimes, the things we think are buried are really just waiting to be found. When I finally finished the last page of my account, I looked at the photos spread across my desk: my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother, Farah. Generations of silence, now stitched together by one fragile act of honesty. Outside, it began to rain, soft, cleansing, relentless. The kind of rain that makes everything feel new again. I opened the window, let the scent of wet earth fill the room, and whispered to no one in particular. It's over now. Fade out. Final line for narration. In the end, it wasn't the secret that broke us. It was the silence that followed. And breaking it, that was our inheritance.